Once again, a round of applause for Mr. Almeida. Thank you. Now, can we have a poll, please? I think we're going to run a poll because we need to decide where we're going to be next year. And part of that decision is going to be taken with the input of the audience here today. So, where are we? Which city would you like future European BRM events to take place? Can we vote through the Slido app? How are we doing? So far we're going to Berlin, just as we take this. How are we doing? Lisbon, good choice. Barcelona, flagging at the moment. Oh, Lisbon's very popular. Barcelona gets a comeback. Looks like we're going to possibly be Lisbon, between Lisbon and Barcelona at the moment. Okay. Let me just get my clicker. Thank you. So where does it look as if we're going? Lisbon. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay. Now, our next session is an executive panel moderated by Paul Lusty, Head of Battery Raw Materials at Fast Markets. Now, Paul will guide a discussion on sustainable growth in Europe's critical minerals production. Our panelists bring diverse insights from across the supply chain, from mining to OEMs, as they explore key questions on midstream capacity, sourcing strategies, and future supply chain. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel. Hannu Hautala from Keliber, Chad Blewett of Jada Project Rio Tinto, Jan Test of Volvo, and Stina Torjensen of Morrow Batteries. Please join us.
A very good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for this, what should be a very interesting panel focused on the catalyst for sustainable growth in Europe's critical minerals production, but also focusing more broadly on how Europe develops its own battery ecosystem focus around these raw materials. So we've just heard an excellent opening address from the European Commission. Clearly it's provided very useful context for the discussion we're going to have over the next 45 minutes. Before we kick off, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists, so working from the end, we've got Hannu Hautala, CEO of Keliber. Keliber is likely to be one of the most advanced lithium projects in Europe, and they're making plans to bring that project online in the near future. We've also got Chad Blewett. He's from Rio Tinto, but also managing director of the Jada project, a world-class lithium project, which I'm sure you're aware of in Europe. We've also got Jan Test. Jan is Global Vice President of Volvo Construction, another European manufacturer with very ambitious decarbonisation targets. And then finally, to my right, we've got Stina Georgeson, Vice President of Sustainability at Morrow Batteries, a company that's based in Europe and is positioning itself to be a sustainability champion in the batteries sector. So maybe if you just take a moment to introduce yourself and your role in your company, please.
Yes, Hannu is my name. I started at Keliber 2020 in March. It was just before the COVID hit, and at that time Keliber was a small 14 people, no money, and we started to collect money, increase the ore reserves and advance engineering, permitting, etc. Since, and that time we had 110 shareholders, 120 shareholders. Then the number of shareholders was reduced during 2022, and now we are part of Sibanye-Stillwater company. Sibanye-Stillwater holds 79% of the shares, and my new title is SVP Keliber at Sibanye. We also have Finnish government through Finnish Minerals Group as shareholders, 20.0%, and handful like 10 minor shareholders. We are now building right now, today, at this very moment, more than 600 construction people are working inside of Keliber fences, building concentrator, erecting pylons and putting cladding and overhead cranes. And at lithium refinery, construction people are assembling electrical motors and pumps and valves and very soon cables and data cables as well. And we are moving forward to start to sell our first tons of lithium hydroxide battery grade.
Hi, Chad Blewett. I'm the Managing Director of the Jadar project in Serbia. We've been on a little bit of a roller coaster ride for the last few years. We lost our license ahead of an election, and I guess a lot of concerns over apparent environmental damage from the project. So we've been working very diligently and consulting quite widely over the last 2 years. And we got our license reinstated on the 17th of July this year, and we've been doing more engagements publicly in media. And I guess we'll be talking about the importance of public acceptance and transparency, and that's certainly something we've been focusing on with the project. The project itself, it would be over 2.55 billion euros was our last estimate. Takes 4 years to construct, and has 2 critical raw materials in lithium carbonate and boric acid, which will be produced from this completely new mineral, only found in Serbia, in the Jadar Valley, called Jadarite. Thank you.
Jan Test. I'm working for Volvo Construction Equipment, which is part of Volvo Group AB. Volvo Group AB is not the cars, but all the rest, including Mack and Renault Trucks. It's a $40 billion company, and this 40 billion company will have to turn every single machines and trucks completely fossil-free by 2040. So it means that we have to turn around all the portfolio, all our products, so that they become non-emitting vehicles. So you can imagine the challenge. So I'm happy to go to Brussels next year to knock at the door of the policymakers so that we accelerate everything. So we are part of the value change and chain, and like all of us here. So it's 3 years I'm participating. 3 years ago we said that we are able to electrify and automatize completely your full mine, and that would make your extraction 0 CO2 footprint. We are able to do that. The machines are available, and that's quite interesting to think about the whole value here, where we produce, for example, lithium at CO2 footprint 0, and we use this lithium in our batteries, and then we use these batteries in our machine that we sell to you as a miner. So I'm very interested to look at the supply chain and the value chain. A lot of interesting talks yesterday. I'm in purchasing, so I know what is the challenge to pass over the regulation to the supplier base. We talk about 2,000 suppliers, 6 billion of purchase for Volvo Construction Equipment. So glad to participate to this interesting panel.
Yep, thank you. I'm Stina Torgersen. I'm Vice President in Morrow Batteries. And so Morrow Batteries, we are opening our factory in southern Norway. We had a Prime Minister opening it in August. So we're in the ramp-up phase and around 100 workers at the factory site. So basically starting commercial production winter, this coming winter. And then working towards moving towards 14 gigawatt hour in a new module next to the site, and then all the way up to 43 gigawatt hours if we manage the full scale-up journey that we want to see. So we're an LFP producer, prismatic cells, but also a very high R&D component where we're working on LNMO cathode and an LMNO battery chemistry, also in prismatic cell format.
Thank you very much for those introductions. So the focus of this morning's panel is very much around sustainable growth, but I think it's very difficult to ignore the backdrop that we're currently seeing with depressed battery raw material prices, but also the relatively bearish demand signals coming out the market, which make a real challenge for incentivizing investment, as we've already heard about this morning. So I think moving to Hannu in the first instance, as the developer of a major European lithium project, how have you managed to navigate the volatility that we've seen in the lithium market over the last few years, and how have you as a company responded to bring your project to the stage it is at today?
Thanks, Paul. The word navigate is excellent in that sense. I like that a lot. Keliber is fully financed. Maybe some of you have read the news that we signed a green loan contract 3-4 weeks ago, 500 million euros. So this facility is now available for the project and needed. We use every day 1 million euros from Monday to Saturday. On the Sunday not so much, but every day 1 million euros. Before that, shareholders have put 250 million euros equity into Keliber company. So and those 250, 500 will enable the project execution of 667 million euros and production start in 2025. Navigate. Keliber took a straight line. We did not start to maneuver ups and downs, 85,000 lithium hydroxide or 8,000 or something. We listened to analyst companies like you and your peers, and we took a moderate, reasonable lowish, and that was the view how we based our business case and did not start to speculate.
Thanks. So I think on a similar vein, Chad, you're developing a major lithium asset within Europe, a hard rock project. How do the current market headwinds, but also the competition from China, significant, relatively low-cost brine production coming online in particularly Latin America, challenge your position and really that whole nascent hard rock mining industry within Europe currently?
Well, I've been in Rio Tinto since 2000 across different product groups, different commodities, and the story is always the same. And I think we had this in the opening, is that there tends to be a period of underinvestment when prices dip, and it always comes down to grade and mine life. So if you have the grade, you have the mine life, and you sit on the cost curve, and you're very confident in your position on the cost curve, you will survive. And we're in a very, I would say, immature market with lithium compared to, say, copper and other metals that have been traded for hundreds of years. So we have to take that into context. So for our project, we're very confident, and we also have a second product in boric acid we never talk about. We actually went looking for boric acid when we found the deposit, and now everyone talks about the lithium. So it means with our mine life is 39 years, our grade of lithium is 1.8%. It means that we can sit very competitively on the cost curve, and we can ride out the volatility. And I would say in my experience, and I think we heard this in the opening address, my experience with commodities is that when people exit the market, there is a period of underinvestment. And that period of underinvestment remains for a period of time well beyond demand uplift. And I think we're going to see this here with lithium, particularly as you look at the graph 28, 30. that you'll see that demand will exceed supply, and particularly for Europe and looking at European suppliers and potential disaggregation of supply between East and West, having secure supply in Europe, and we've seen the lessons from COVID-19, the lessons from the Ukraine war, supply chains can disappear overnight. So it's very important to have European supply on your doorstep.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but you mentioned the cost curve a couple of times. Where does JADAR broadly sit on the global cost curve? Have you got an understanding of that currently?
Yes.
Could you elaborate?
So, that was an answer. You put me on the spot. I put you on the spot with an answer. No, we're very competitively placed on the cost curve, and that's why I mentioned it. It does help that we've got the second product in boric acid. It does help with mine life and grade. And no matter what the commodity is, if you have those two attributes, you will survive and thrive. And I think in Europe, when we have to look at critical raw materials, it is so essential. If we don't have them, we don't have the green and digital transition. We have to look at those two attributes, and we have to support projects. So not just the battery industry, we have to support the raw materials industry. Otherwise, you're going to have battery makers that are going to be in the same position they are now, relying on China and other suppliers who control certain aspects of the market.
Okay, Jan, now moving on to sort of European strategy around its critical raw materials supply chain build out. How do you think the European Commission, member states, but also companies can take a more strategic long-term view that allows Europe to sort of ride out these cyclical lows within the markets which depress and de-incentivize investment?
Yeah, so I'm not a specialist in the European Commission way of working. I know I'm based in Brussels, so some of my friends are actually working with them or in the Commission themselves. Difficult for me to comment. What I can comment is a bit bouncing back on what you just said, Chad, is what is important for us is competitivity and availability. Having a single source solution in Europe is neither the answer actually, because it's not good enough to secure the supply. During the COVID, wouldn't have we a global supplier base, we would stop every plant, because we were relying on a supplier base that is actually global. So when Italy shut down, then we could rely on the rest of the world. When China shut down, we could rely on the rest of the world. So it's important for us as OE makers that we have a reliable, safe, non-risky supplier base. The other part of it is the sustainability roadmap. As I said, Volvo Group is committed and will not compromise on delivering by 2040 our targets that are actually the commitment we have to the Paris agreements and the commitment we have to the Science-Based Target Initiative. So now we talk about the ecosystem that I talked about, is you guys, us here, how do we accelerate? Accelerating only the battery making is not going to be a solution in itself, because you have to accelerate the whole ecosystem. And the ecosystem is also the raw material. But it doesn't mean that it's only supporting mining in Europe. Is mining in Europe going to be a solution only? I doubt. We have here, one of my colleagues is specialized in material. Daphne is over there at the end. If you want to talk to her, she knows about the strategical moves, because she's a specialist for that. And actually, we don't think it's the only solution. So we need to have a solution that is complementary to what's going on all around the world. Otherwise, you create your own silo and your own dependency. So I don't know to what extent the European Commission is having this holistic view, but protectionism looks a complex thing to have and may have some side effects that we don't want to have. So I don't know if it's an answer, but I think the answer is ecosystem and a global view rather than a silo view, European focused. This said, if we can promote and support the current project, like what you said, Anu, this is really good. And I heard billions of money being invested. Thanks, European Commission. We need more. Most of us are stuck between the capacity to invest and actually the demand. the demand is not here. We suffer, BMW and other makers, French makers of cars, but also in the construction industry. We are in a really low, and we are investing 1.5 billion euro of R&D expense every year in the group, just to turn around the portfolio to electrification. And there is no money coming because the demand is low. That is the problem. So how do we boost both of this? This is really the question.
Thank you. So in the context of the Critical Raw Materials Act, we see a lot of focus on targets around expected levels for domestic extraction of minerals, but also recycling. So I was going to ask Stina, because I know Morrow are very focused on, sort of developing a circular system for batteries. How well do you think Europe is doing in terms of addressing some of those targets, and how challenging is it going to be for us to meet the targets set out by the Commission?
Yeah, I think certainly they're very challenging targets. I think perhaps the biggest challenge is the 2030 target. I think time-wise, we may have a bit of a problem. I think particularly, extraction, processing, getting to where we want by 2030 will be really tough. But I think in the long run, I think they are realistic. If we give us a slightly longer kind of time horizon, I think they're definitely realistic. I also think that they are, pragmatic in a way, and I think they do give us direction of where we want to go. And I think, say the target of, avoiding more than 65% reliance on a single country is a very, very sound target, and I think it will inform also other sectors as well. So I think that's, it's definitely, they're doable, they're pragmatic. I think on recycling, again, it will be very tough in the short run, but I think in the long run, looking into the late 30s and 40s, I think Europe will exceed the target that has been set by far, just primarily because we are actually then having high volumes that can be recycled, and we will succeed, I think, in building circular ecosystems.
Thank you. So I'm now going to move us on to think a bit more about European competitiveness, both for attracting investment in critical raw materials, but also considering the policy framework, some of the challenges posed by EU, but also domestic politics, and also the importance of availability of funding streams to support critical raw materials projects. So I think coming back to Chad, you're in the progress of developing a world-class lithium asset. You've worked in many countries around the world within the mining industry. How do you view the competitiveness of Europe for attracting investment in the mining sector relative to those other jurisdictions which are also looking to attract investment currently?
Well, capital is global. And investors will look at a variety of factors. I think let's start with Europe's strength. I think political stability is one. Very high ESG standards is another. And I think that is something that is a differentiator, but we need to stick to it. We need to follow through. The other thing I think is there's a long history, perhaps not in the last 40 years, a long history going back to the Bronze Age in terms of mining, which started in Europe. And I think where we see some of the negatives is we look at the US and we mention the IRA, and we look at the incentives and the massive investment that's come on the back of the IRA, and incentives, particularly where you've got an immature market, they help smooth out, particularly if you have issues with funding. I think for Europe to thrive, there's 3 Ps they need to focus on. One is people and revitalising how trades, university curriculums can support the minerals industry, because there's been a lack of investment there for the last 40 years. The second is permitting. Wherever I work in the world, it's the bugbear of every mining project is permitting. So how do we electronically systemise the permitting process rather than people in a room stamping things and losing sheets of paper? And the third one is public acceptance. There has to be more transparency around the permitting process And we have to confront disinformation. What we're dealing with in Serbia now is targeted disinformation, right? And the type that we're seeing in election campaigns in Europe and the US against mining, against lithium, right? And saying that it's radioactive, saying that it's going to poison people, cause children's cancer. So this playbook can be rolled out everywhere else in Europe where you have critical raw materials projects. So making sure there's a program for public acceptance, hosting town halls, debates, making sure the mining industry is supported. Where I come from in Australia, everyone loves the mining industry. The top taxpayer, it's the top supporter and donator of infrastructure in regional and community programs, and people understand the benefits that come from the raw materials extractive sector. And we can't demonise the sector, whereas we look in this room and we look at the microphone and everything around you, it all comes from the mining industry. And we have to make sure that the mining that we have today in Europe is to the highest standards in the world, which are European ESG standards, and the highest level of transparency and community involvement.
Thank you. Chad, I'm pleased that you mentioned the IRA, because that was something I was going to ask Stina about. You know, you've got a background in terms of sort of trying to interpret global policy and regulation around the sector. We often see sort of a framing of the IRA in the context of sort of a competition between Europe and the US, but also more broadly North America in terms of attracting investment. Do you think that is the right way we should be looking at it, or should we be seeking a much more collaborative approach with the US?
Yeah, well, and I think there will be more collaboration as well with the US and these frameworks and kind of harmonizing them. But today, if we look at it in 2024, and if you see it from a perspective of a battery cell manufacturer that we are in Morrow Batteries, so, you know, the competitive element that is there is, you know, one is that scale up is much more easily done in the US relative to Europe. So scale up both for battery cell production, but also the refining and the supply chain there. And of course, the other element is that it's, you know, we have the potential challenge of China even more aggressively, in a sense, targeting the European market. I think that's, you know, our biggest concern when it kind of comes to kind of the competitive element there from a cell producer point of view. Yeah. And yeah, so, and I'm happy to kind of follow up there. So in a sense of what should we do then? That's the extra question, right?
Yeah, I mean, how do we address that, I suppose, is the key.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and this is, I guess, the million-dollar question, but I think in terms of kind of breaking it down a little bit, and again, seeing from a kind of cell manufacturer perspective, I think, you know, when we talked about this kind of earlier, you've also, you know, highlighted the fact that we want to stay WTO compliant, and that's a kind of constraint to some extent on what we want to do. But I think, you know, I think this kind of tailor-made approach that the European Union is trying to kind of approach this with at the moment, you know, is the way forward. Although, you know, all of us are kind of desperately, you know, wanting more ambition and more muscle there, and perhaps higher tariffs, for example. But again, from our perspective, I think the key elements there of this kind of tailor-made approach that Europe is trying to do is really to move away from over-reliance on R&D and R&D projects. That's very comfortable from a European perspective, because we're, you know, that's okay to do from an orthodox, more economic perspective. It's the way in which the European Union has handled competitiveness issues. So, but we need to kind of move away from this kind of R&D focus and towards scale-up and facilitating scale-up of our strategic projects, whether they are critical raw materials like strategic project or other elements that will be the building blocks of the future European economy. So going into scale-up mode, that's really where Europe needs to go, and kind of collaborate public and private in order to do that. Then we can do both the Chinese competition better and also what is emerging from the US.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
If I may, on the because we had this debate yesterday between IRA and what China is doing in terms of not really respecting WTO regulation, and Europe being the good student in the room, you know, sticking to ESG commitment, sticking to the WTO and so on. Free market, open market, come and take our market. It's free here. It works, maybe long term, but short term we need a solution, because the industry is suffering. And so I feel that resilience is in question here, resilience of our industries here in this room. How are we able to cope when we have no market demand? How are we able to scale up when the investment and the venture capital structure is not actually helping us in Europe? It's not US, it's not China. And venture capital don't want to invest into industries. They want to invest into SaaS solutions. They want to invest into, startup from the Silicon Valley. 10 people building a business, that's where they invest. And we request a lot of money to scale up. So for me, that's the question I address a little bit is, okay, we are soft. We make, a tax of 20% on the battery, let's say roughly, which is very smooth compared to US asking for 100% on every electric vehicle coming from China or batteries from China. So I think the real question is how do we resist? Are we resilient as an ecosystem to this challenge right now? And I don't have the answer, but I think demand is something important for us, and then the support in all the OPEX and CAPEX that we need to put in place.
So on the subject of funding, Hannu, you've recently executed a green loan facility, which included a tranche of funding from the European Investment Bank. How important is that type of funding from the European Union to, catalyze investments right across the value chain in Europe?
Absolutely, highly important. And when doing this, EU and Europe is developing the strategic autonomy, like Chad talked about the European supply chain. It is exactly that. Secondly, it is about the European climate and energy resilience, also important topic. That's the reason why we do that all, climate change. And as a byproduct, a lot of well-paid jobs are created, and it is also important.
Okay.
Can I just add as well, you get to be the display home for all of Europe because you will be first, right? Showing European standards, showing how development can be done the right way. It's not just jobs as well, it's all the ecosystem you build around you, suppliers, institutional infrastructure, new curriculums. It's fantastic. So
absolutely,
you will have lots of visitors.
Correct.
So I think we're going to spend the sort of final 10 minutes or so before we move on to some of the Q&A, talking about, how Europe specifically catalyzes sustainable growth, given the emphasis that the European Commission puts on sustainable critical raw material value chains in the context of the CRMA, but also the fact that, sustainable operating practices are sort of fundamental and core to most European businesses. I think, Chad, in your introduction, you alluded to some of the challenges facing permitting projects in Europe. Where would you rank that on the scale of challenges for Europe? So the whole topic around social license, but also communication and engagement of communities in mining jurisdictions.
It's actually all related. So, I think the permitting process, as I said before, we need to have harmonisation. We need to have electronic permitting processes. I've worked in Africa where we've got electronic permitting processes. In Australia, US. It's a really quick fix, and Europe has a leapfrog opportunity, so a second mover advantage, and I would beg, borrow and steal what works elsewhere and adapt it for the local context. Make sure it's electronic. But we also have to make sure that the permitting processes are very transparent, and that includes environmental permits as well. Make sure that you over-engage with the community, because we're living in an age where disinformation on social media, and we saw the events of this in the UK recently, right? It can happen so quickly. So the antidote to that is to be overly transparent. And I think we're seeing now with disinformation around the world that the permitting regimes where you do your engineering, then you do your environmental studies, then you release, they were built 50 years ago, right? They were designed 50 years ago for a different context. Now, if you get accused of having radioactivity in your water, giving children cancer, poisoning the water of 85 million people. These are all real claims against our project. And you haven't gone through that legislative process so that you can actually defend yourself. Disinformation takes 5 seconds. It takes weeks and months to actually come back with a scientific basis for the disinformation. So I think Europe and I think the world is going to have to look at permitting regimes now and say, how do we front end the public engagement around what we know today, and then we make more repeated engagements, even if we aren't certain, because as you know, honey, engineers want to be certain before they put in studies, right? But we don't have that certainty now. And I don't think we can move forward with projects in Europe unless we change the permitting regime to make more public acceptance far earlier.
Thanks for that. I mean, I suppose, I think I can come back to you on that maybe, but also Hannu, you know, strict sustainability standards and particularly the costs associated with impact assessments come with a cost for the industry. You know, how does Europe then balance sustainability and the requirements around that and the desire of companies to fulfill or support the environmentally sensitive development of projects with competition within the global market that we currently see?
Yeah. First of all, the rules and conditions for the environmental permit, they are needed faster. We need to accelerate the permitting process. It is the key. After that, competitive edge and sustainability, they belong somehow together. Sustainability can be part of the competitive strengths of a company or lithium producer. In case of Keliber, we have selected technologies which enable us to produce less than half Scope 1 emissions compared to our peers, and I think it will develop a competitive edge, less than half. And why so? We have selected LNG as a fuel at the high temperature process. Our peers in Asia or somewhere else, they may use, for example, coal dust. It is more CO2 intensive. Secondly, Keliber CO2 emissions, Scope 2, are less than 1/5 of that of our peers. Why so? Finnish electricity is 98% non-fossil. So this altogether bring our Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions to 1/4 or 1/3 of our peers, and it will create a competitive advance. And then certainly our European customers are willing to pay a premium. Automotive companies do not want to hear the word premium, and I say that the premium can be also a discounted reduction of the price.
Yeah, thanks for... you remember several years ago we were talking about putting really strong standards on quality, and at the time the supplier base was coming back to us as an OE and say, oh, quality, you know, it's more expensive if you want to have premium quality. I think sustainability is exactly what you said. It cannot be more expensive. It's an investment, and normally we should get the value out of it. So when we hear about, oh, that's the premium price for my lithium, are you ready to pay for it? No, we are not ready to pay for it. The reason is that we cannot pay for it and not having the final customer be able to pay for it neither. So we are squeezed in the middle. So the business case somehow is not on a spot, is more on a long-term view. For us, sustainability at the group, it's quite easy. We are the actors of reducing roughly 150 million tons per year CO2 equivalent emission in the group, because that's what we emit, because the machines are diesel. And 95% of our footprint is diesel engine. So if we cut this by 2040 completely to 100%, this is how we contribute. And then this is showing that it's actually competitive in that case. That's the solution. So the mechanism is not easy to define. We discussed about it yesterday in a workshop. It's not easy to define. And for purchasing team, how do we value this sustainability part is still still work in progress, because you still have the price at the end of the day. And the price of what you purchase is what you sell to your customer. If you tell me my footprint is half of the other one, if I say this to my customer, first they don't buy enough electric machines, and then they will say, yeah, and so? So I think it's the whole ecosystem and the whole value chain that needs to take it as an investment, and it's not in the price. It has to be somehow differently. So difficult for us anyway.
Can I just follow up? You have obviously got very strong sustainability and carbon neutrality targets. How challenging is mapping carbon across your supply chain and having good visibility along your supply chain?
Yeah. So that's a challenge right now. We talk about the visibility of the supply chain, especially from a risk perspective, because anything that touches a supplier somewhere in the world actually has an impact on us. We've seen that with the COVID, of course, and Ukraine war. You don't get carbon black from Russia, for example, because we stop everything, and then you don't get tires, because carbon black is one of the components of tires. So right now, the way we do it, I think, is a little bit mechanical or manual. We ask our supplier base to tell us how they trace the CO2 footprint of their own supplier, and then their own supplier have to ask, and so on, and then we go back to the mine. So, from the customer to the end. So that's the way it's done. There's some SaaS solution. Some of you are in the room, I guess, looking at how do you map the CO2 footprint, how do you calculate. I think it's not yet very engineered properly, and it's not utilizing all the power of AI, for example, which I think could be used. So we don't have a magic bullet right now. It's very manual.
Thank you. Stina, do you want to come in and maybe elaborate, maybe give us an example around how you're considering that in the context of your business?
Yeah, I mean, this resonates with a lot of work we do. Just to the kind of the first points here on, is there a market demand? I think, the ability to use public procurement in the European Union is really really critical. It's part of the Net Zero Industry Act, and really, we have to kind of take this opportunity to create and demand for sustainable, kind of de-risked products. And that's where the kind of the first movers can go, if you like, right? And then we pioneer sustainability solutions that maybe, particularly in the beginning, the early phase, is perhaps slightly more expensive. But as we move forward into the 30s, costs come down. So using public procurement, I had the fortune of being at one of the key Chinese battery recyclers this spring. And the batteries that were laying out there already for quite high volumes of recycled material were batteries that had come from the first public buses. So at this, over a decade ago, China pushed into, massive public procurement of electric buses, and now, that's where we have the recycled content flows coming from. But the lesson for us here is really the value of public procurement, and us as in the kind of battery constituency to really push for ambitious target on battery on public procurement, and using that strategically, I think is really key for getting these practices going in a way. So that's one way to create the market. The battery regulation itself, I think also with the potential for introducing a threshold of CO2 footprint, is also something that's going to be very valuable for a number of players, not least us as a cell manufacturer, and we're hoping for kind of an ambitious threshold there. And then, there's several things to pick up on. I agree on carbon footprint. I think that's crucial. I think we will see more digital solutions, coming forward. I think there's also going to be a normative kind of change here on that, and building practices for good reporting. But the hard work is, of course, to make the CO2 footprint and the other environmental impacts come down. And how do we really do that? Again, from a cell manufacturer, our kind of key work is getting our suppliers to move to renewable energy. So again, the fact that the mining company like yourself could have renewable energy at the mining site, extremely beneficial. And of course, increasing the levels of recycled content is really crucial. And then, of course, doing also novel chemistries as well. We in Morrow Batteries as well, we're using our R&D departments to kind of have sustainability breakthroughs in a way. So again, our LNMO chemistries will have a number of benefits when it comes to sustainability, just by virtue of how the chemistry actually operates, and the fact that we can take out cobalt, we can have it non-toxic, etc. So also this through R&D, and again the strength of R&D in Europe is actually something that can kind of push us forward. I have one final point to make, but
no, please make it, and then we'll just very briefly move on to the questions from the floor. But make your final point.
No, exactly. So on on battery material, and the fact that we can kind of we can really push forward there. So actually, sorry, I lost my thread actually. So you go ahead. And,
okay, well, that conveniently brings us to some of the audience questions. We're going to try and work through these quite rapidly because we don't have a huge amount of time left. So the first is related to the regulatory drivers for the energy transition, I think, which everyone would agree. It is certainly a policy driven transition. Does anyone want to comment on, whether the price slump that we're seeing in the market currently has actually been caused by not allowing market forces to play out?
No.
I think market forces got us into the climate change mess, right? So we had a lot of free riding of the environment, and there was no consequences. So people could pump out as many carbon emissions as they wanted to. And I think without market intervention, that would have continued, right? And it's the boiling frog. We are the boiling frog. And if we don't act on climate change, our whole lives, our societies, agriculture, it all shuts down. So that's the bigger picture. And how we get there, we need to get there. So I think regulation is a good thing in this sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think, to date, we haven't really been internalizing the true costs of the production of metals, and that's what's changing and resulting in the changing market dynamics we see. We haven't had a huge amount of discussion about recycling, but it's obviously extremely important from both security of supply, but also sustainability perspective. How big, I've come to Stina maybe for this, how big a role do you think recycling is going to play?
I think it will play a big role, but again, it'll come later than we've hoped in the early days.
Okay, short and sweet, as we're very short on time. So we've got a question in relation to the IRA. Should Europe try and replicate the IRA, or should it carve its own path, do you think?
If I can take this one, because I discussed about it before, I think it's you never copy-paste. It's very dangerous. Because our structure is different here in Europe. We have a different governance, we have different values. So I would not say don't copy-paste. As I said, short term, we need something to protect the whole industry and the whole value chain. That's maybe what we need to think about, what mechanism we have. But copy-pasting, I would not.
And I think we'll just wrap up with one final question. So we got a question, how does Europe realistically compete? I suppose the onus here is, really, should we be looking to compete, or should we be looking to, carve our own path and maybe collaborate with these countries? Does anyone want to discuss that point?
Maybe the Critical Raw Material Act is a good start and a good initiative, but it just needs to be brought into practice and maybe reinforced and strengthened a bit, namely 10% own raw materials is not very much. We need maybe 20 or even more.
Yeah, just adding to that, I completely agree. And I think the Critical Raw Materials Act is a major milestone. It says it's the what. Now we need to get to the implementing standards and practices, which is the how. And as I said before, Europe can beg, borrow and steal second mover advantages out there and do it quickly.
Well, I think that's a great and you know, positive note to finish on. I think, you know, the breadth of the value chain that we've had represented on the panel has made for a very interesting discussion. I'd just like to thank the panelists for their time this morning and for an engaging discussion. There'll be plenty of time to speak to them around the event, so please do approach them and follow up with any further questions you may have. But yes, thanks very much to the panel.